Chapter 3. A Festival in Wick. George reached a wide parting of trees down the road from the Hemmings at around 1 o'clock. There, beside the white road, on trim grass, was a small station, raised and donning a pretty awning. This was the rail stop for Wood Flats. The next train to come through would carry George to Wick. The quiet of the afternoon was well settled on everything. No one but him was at the decorative stop. The sparse forest dissipated into open rolling hills to his left, northward. Only a few clouds hung in the dark blue sky. Somewhere, a smell of ripe fruit passed from one of the hidden orchards in the small wood. The train arrived with its ghostly whistle, unseen around a bend in the short trees. Small white puffs of steam ascended to the treetops that resembled them. The engine was contoured with pleasant lines of yellow over its green body. The stack humbly continued to dispense steam as the train slowed to a stop at the platform. Those cars were old but well kept and often repainted, always the same shade of leafy green. On the rounded car, George stepped over the polished wood and gave a floor to the bushy-faced conductor. He smiled, blew 2 puffs on his whistle, and the train was off before George had his seat. Several families and old ladies were aboard, all heading for Wick. The car smelled of leather and old books, a very sweet fragrance. George clung tighter to the hybridex. No one gave it any mind. Soon there were no forests but the open, heaving country of Middle Penzard. The train rolled around the top of a valley which held in it the town of Cherry, Christmas capital of Estatia. The muffled clack of the wheels accompanied silvery tones of metal. Afternoon sun had started to pour in one side of the cabin, soon shifting and diverting as the tracks turned. The sun patches washed over him in a surf of warmth. Small houses started to line the tracks on the west side, then soon on the eastern. They approached the station of Wick. George rose before the car had come to a full stop. Then he departed as soon as the doors were open. Many people piled out with him, since the town was in the midst of its annual romp. Wick was situated at the northern end of the valley, up against 2 hills crowned with pines. The fields between the town and hilltops were the site of many temporary houses and pavilions. Already, the frying of corn and meats wafted their enchantment through the streets from the stands above. George passed through the throng of people on his way to the field. Many of the shops had displays before their windows, and George peered at some. One of these was Dell's, a curiosity emporium which gathered the missing or forgotten history of those in the region. George stepped inside. He hadn't done so in several years. The air was warm and had a delightful pine scent, generated by the many shelves and alcoves. These held the mysterious stock of Dell's. All of it was organized to fit some category, often obscure but more often clear with patient discernment. The door closing drowned out the laughter and soft ruckus of the street. Now it became near silent, twinkling as George inspected the trinkets with more focus. Each shelf was its own theater, contrived to represent one of the categories of curio presented. In many such cubby were animals, unmoving and undying, fashioned from glass, porcelain, wood, china, pottery, and any number of vibrant or earthy fabrics. In one such cubby there was a carpet, or a tiny rug. The walls were dotted with minuscule paintings, and proportionate furniture of the empire was arrayed to accommodate the occupants. They were bunny rabbits made of blue wool, a dog's salt shaker in yellow plastic, and its black cat Peppermate. Their arrangement was almost narrative, or hid some true story of secrecy and confrontation that George hoped to divine. In the same form were the rest of the wares of Dell's, presented throughout the deep store. Its owner invisibly tinkered by the counter, interminable. George decided to get on with his excursion, and passed a row of sun-bleached teddy bears, who regarded him while they sat in the proscenium of the shop window. There were jigs and rondos about as George rejoined the townsfolk in their frolics. 1 acre had been laid down with planks and was now the dance floor. A multi-level construction of crates and ladders had become a bandstand with players sequestered in the angles as miniatures in a shadow box. They played the all-time favorites of Estatian folk, the sun corn dance, which pecked and spun. George rounded the dance floor, strung on all sides with lamps eager for the night. He took an obligatory pork bed from his Aunt Alma with evident relief. The hyradex was held under his arm, not entirely secure, but savoring the pork bed trumped caution. The latter morsel started as a generous slice of pork belly, cooked on a flat iron, then battered in cornbread dough and fried. Often as was the case then, honey was drizzled over the top. George was halfway through his and signaled with over-gesticulation his need of a cloth. His aunt supplied it, and George then held the rest of the pork bed in his mouth while his newly clean hands secured the hyradex. After a shared laugh, George said goodbye to his Aunt Alma. On he went to his appointed spot. Its secrecy, he hoped, had been inviolate, even on a day as buzzing as that. He went across the field and up as it rose at a steep angle into the hill. Many others rested on their backs, dotting the face of the hill this way and that with spots of yellow and blues and pink. There was a shelf dug into part of the hill where a line of beehives oversaw the town, catered to by a faceless keeper of short stature. At last, the dark and deep green pine trunks came into view. George wiped the last bit of grease from his fingers on the grass and found that the trough in the ground he hoped lay empty was indeed so. He settled into the soft cushion of needles. The view was supreme. George nestled the hyradex in his lap and surveyed the extent of Wick. Estatia had 16 festival days, many often celebrated across the extent of the land. Wick itself was not a large town. It accommodated as well as most, but filled as it was then with several hundred Estatians, it seemed a metropolis. Out from the station, the number 1 train of the Green Lion coursed its way under the Bucher Bridge on the north end of town. It then passed along the outer edge of the streets. A few clouds crossed the sun. George sat back and opened the soft leather cover of the most enticing volume. Yet he didn't begin to read it at that moment, and found that his head rested on the pine firs as well. Still, with the book open in his hands, he wanted to read it, but felt assured that he could at any time. The clouds, as wind, passed by in his ears. George stirred and sighed long and deep, as if breath had just been given to his lungs. There were smaller, whiter clouds down by the steeple of the church. The number 1 train was back, and its puffy steam made a lazy route into the pinkish sky. George sat up and pushed the rust out of each limb and joint. He brushed some pine needles from the open book still in his lap. The sun had just descended beyond the hills behind him. By then, the lamps were lit, and people strolled in bunches around the emerald lawns. Everything was aglow, and even the music had taken a gentler aspect. A girl played on a piano down below, accompanied by a bass and violin and percussion for a spiced-up waltz. A pair of teddy bears carried some bags of leftover food into town. All the valley was cool, and the view reached Cherry and its last fringes not 5 miles away. The pink deepened into mauve. George returned the gaze, and in a minute the fox slipped around a pine trunk. George glanced back to the open hyradex, where, on one page, was the heading, "The Tale of the Fox and the Egg." A fox in the pale skies, mid fields of white starry grass, was shivering for the cold. He found a nest of golden straw, and in it a golden egg. He was starving too, and went into the nest. There he found the egg was warm, and he was about to bite it. Instead, he wrapped his body about the large egg. That became more golden the more it was held. The fox then knew beauty, and became concerned that the egg should remain beautiful. So the fox held the egg and gave his own warmth, and the egg gave warmth back in return. But the fox grew tired and fell asleep. The egg hatched, and out came an enormous bird with long red gold feathers. The fox, weak from hunger, was near death. And so the bird of dawn gave some of its flesh in return, and nourished the fox in the heat of another golden egg. The fox revived, and there in the nest was the breakfast of the stars, shared by both. The golden egg retained its shape and was sent further on to become the world.